Hey everybody, welcome back to English 323 Literature of Hawaii. I am Mark Panic. We just want to go over a little bit of the timeline that all these things have been set and or written in. Now, anytime you read something, you don't need to have a PhD in history in order to contextualize it, but even if you just do a little Googling around to look at a little bit of what was going on when the book was either written or set, it's going to enrich your reading experience because these things have a lot more to say about what happened than what just what went on in the story. Now, starting with, let's see, when are we set here? Within the time before light is 1824, and that's when Matthew comes upon Pono and begins to listen to his story. Pono is then telling a story that is set in the 1700s, okay, around 1776, around there, and we're reading a book that was written in way over here in probably around 2007 is when Ian finished the manuscript, and then it was finally published in 2017, and we'll talk about that a little bit as it goes. Okay, so what's our context here? Well, we can go all the way back, probably need to even go extend this way back, and we're looking at there are various estimates of the date when the first Tahitians arrived in Hawaii, but the archaeologist Patrick Kirsch is pegging it at AD 124. And then we're going all the way to 1778 when Hawaii was first stumbled upon by people who were not Tahitians and Kanaka Maoli. That's when Captain Cook first arrived. Okay, then the other key date here is 1820, and that's when simultaneously the groups of missionaries from New England and the whalers also from New England started arriving en masse in Hawaii. So between Cook's arrival and here, you had some merchants mainly trading in sandalwood and furs from the Pacific Northwest, but it was right here where the big Haole invasion began in 1820. Next thing we want to look at is close to that is 1840s, 1850, someplace around there, 1852. Okay, a lot going on almost in the blink of an eye in history book time here. This is when, by 1846, there were over 600 whaling ships just anchored off of either Lahaina or Honolulu. There were packs and packs of these whalers who were now populating Honolulu. Even, you can imagine what that Honolulu looked like if we see what the Honolulu of Ian McMillan's 1824 looks like at the beginning of In the Time Before Light. Then we have something's happening in here where the idea of collective land use, which was embodied by the ahupua'a system, which is the way that land tenure worked in the times that Pono is describing in his story and all the way back to the beginning here, that suddenly vanished. And what we have is called the Great Mahele, and then we have the Alien Land Ownership Act of 1852 is happening. Now, lots of people point to the overthrow and annexation for when things began to go really wrong for the native people here. And of course, we can't discount that fact, but this is where it really went down because this is where all the land started to be grabbed by people who are not from here, mainly for commercial agriculture in the name of sugar. Okay, and we'll get back to that too. And then we have what? 1893 is, of course, when the overthrow occurred, and 1898 is when annexation happened without a treaty of annexation. The next big important date we had was in 1933, and this is when the idea of local as a political and cultural term really began to get most of its traction. Okay, there was, and we'll do a little bit of talking about this in a subsequent video as well. But 1959. What happened in 1959? Well, that was when statehood happened. Unfortunately for the native folks here, most of the damage had long since been done, but that was the final nail in the coffin for the colonization of this place when it became a state. Now, significantly, in Hawaii literary history, not Hawaiian literary history, but in Hawaii literary history, this is when a book called Hawaii, not Hawaii, there was no Okina, it wasn't spelled correctly, it was called Hawaii, by a guy named James Michener came out, and that part of that is on your reading list. But this became a book that most of the world read about Hawaii and then claimed to have some expertise about this place. And because of having read that book, this book wound up taking up most of the oxygen in the room as far as storytelling being spread to places not from here about this place. And we will talk in detail about that. An excerpt of that is on your reading list. So that coincided with statehood. Right after that, Night in You, there's a movie by the great Elvis Presley called Blue Hawaii, and that had a similar effect to Michener's best-selling novel about kind of showing the world the paradise postcard stereotype image of this place. A few other things happened that we'll talk about in 1964. This is key to a lot of the, and in response, of course, to this Elvis stuff and this Michener stuff, there's a pamphlet that came out by a Native Hawaiian scholar called John Dominus Holt called On Being Hawaiian. And this is often looked upon as the beginning of what's known as the Hawaiian Renaissance, and it changed a lot of what happened subsequently in the literature of Hawaii area. And we will get into that a little bit later too. And then let's see, 1978. All right, there was a conference was held among local writers, among people who are from here, among people mainly of that local in the sense of a collective non-white resistance to white power, those folks. And this is when the writers of this place began to, in earnest, really start telling their own stories about what this place is really like. And largely in response to the Hollywood version and to the Michener version of what everybody else thought this place was. The misconceptions that probably led to Little Jack's teacher telling everybody that the Queen had enslaved all of her people and America freed them. Okay. Let's see, this is the last one for now. 1998, oh, I have two of them here. 1968. This is when Ian McMillan accepted a position to be a professor in the creative writing department at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. 1968. 1998 is when his first major work set in this place came out. It's an amazing novel called The Red Wind. And wish all these things could be on a reading list, but we don't really have the time. But look at that. There's 30 years of him living here and acting as the creative writing instructor for many of the folks who created and attended the Talk Story Conference, as they were in his classes as his students. But 30 years went by before he really felt confident enough to be a voice of his experience, even his own experience in this place. All right, and then 2007 is when he wrote the In the Time Before Light. Again, Ian McMillan is not from here. He is he's a white guy. He's an English professor, but he spent many, many years trying to immerse himself in this place in order to be able to write something that didn't come off as what Michener did, and we'll take a look at that later in the semester. Well, why the big gap? Why 10 years between his having written it and its having been published? That's a really complicated question, and that's at the center of why we're even reading the things that we're reading right now. Let's pan. Can you pan for me one time before we close up here, Ken? So we're going from 27 all the way back to 1824. And notably, from a structural perspective, you have, in the time before light, beginning from the point of view of a white visitor. This is Matthew, the British guy who wants to collect Pono's story. We don't overtly have the Haole author writing from the point of view of the Kanaka Maoli, the native Hawaiian. Okay, so this is when the frame narrative of In the Time Before Light is set. Then it goes all the way back to Pono's younger years. What's going on here? Well, it's easy to see right off the bat that there are a number of Hawaii stereotypes that were perpetuated by Michener and by Elvis and by the Hawaii Visitors Bureau that are beginning to be upset the moment you get to page 1. Well, does Honolulu look like a paradise? No, okay. We just have the muddy streets, we have the prostitution, we have those squalid bars. All of those things are meant to upset the expectation of a mainland reader. Okay, and then we go back, even Pono himself. Look at the way he's dressed. It's a big surprise to Matthew that he's dressed in a certain way, that he speaks impeccable English. Even that is trying to upset a stereotype of, you know, maybe the unintelligent native. Well, guess who's the smartest guy in the room every time you see him? It's Pono. Okay? And then we go back to Pono's tale of this is life in the Ahupua'a system. And it's upsetting the stereotype that prior to contact, these were uncivilized people, and then Western contact led to civilization. Well, you already see a really complex political system happening here. You know, you see that the relationships between the different valleys and the news that's coming from other islands of people beginning to invade and take over and things like that suggest that, as Patrick Kirsch put it, this was like Egypt of the pharaohs. This was like the Incas. This was a highly civilized place long before anyone from the outside came to. So the stereotype that the white saviors came to turn this into a civilized place is being upset by, you know, page 10 or 15 of In the Time Before Light. And above all, as soon as the missionaries started gaining a foothold here, they began to create the stereotype of the lazy Hawaiian, okay? And unfortunately, that began to persist all the way through your timeline, is that the Hawaiian must be lazy because they don't want to toil for 12 hours a day on the sugar field. Well, obviously when we see Pono's stories of moving rocks all day or of the battles between the two different valleys, lazy is not the word that comes to mind. So that's consciously being upset as well. I think the key for me for this particular book is that it was written so late in the timeline, and it's looking back with a perspective that is recognizing every single one of these events, if not in your face, certainly between the lines, all right? And we'll look in detail at some more of these things as you move forward. But please enjoy the rest of the book, and I'm looking forward to seeing your comments. Aloha.